Hi, thanks for joining me for Beekeeping 101. I'm so excited that you're here. Today we're going to talk about what it takes to get started in beekeeping, as well as some of the skills. So we'll start off today by talking about the honeybee. So in Canada, we do have the European honeybee. We're going to talk a little bit about biology. We're going to talk about their nest. We're going to talk about some foraging, habits, requirements, as well as equipment, what you're going to need, and then we'll move into doing some inspections. What kind of time does that take? What are we going to be looking for in inspections? And then we'll talk about the summer, the fall, and then getting our bees ready for winter. So today is a 101 crash course on keeping bees. There's definitely so much to cover, and we're only going to be scratching the surface today. But this is going to give you a really good idea going forward. It'll give you a base, something to build on and expand your knowledge. So I'm so excited you're here. Let's get started. Let's kick it off today talking about honeybee biology. This is a really important piece of knowledge to have, to know the life cycle of bees, the different castes of bees we're going to find inside of our colony, as well as the jobs that they perform. Knowing these things is going to help us understand management through the seasons a little bit better. So it's an important place to start. We're going to start first talking about the three different castes of bees are within your honeybee colony. So within every honeybee colony, we do have three different kinds of bees. First is going to be our queen bee, our worker bees, and our drone bees. You can tell them apart from their differentiating characteristics, physical characteristics, which we can see in this picture here. Let's dive into the queen first and a little bit more about her. So the queen honeybee, she's the only bee in our colony that is able to lay fertilized eggs. The thing that differs from the queen and the workers, who are also all female, is a fully developed reproductive system, making the queen the only bee in our colony able to reproduce and lay eggs to produce more worker bees. She is a very important part of the colony. She is in charge of reproduction, the growth of our colony. So we can't have a functioning colony without a strong queen to head that up. Let's talk about the worker bees. The worker bees in our colony are all female. And like the name suggests, they really do all of the work. And then we have the drones. Drones are all males. Their purpose is for mating. They have very few other jobs. When we look at our colony, we need to have one queen, many workers, in the summer about 10% drones. That's going to be what makes up our colony. Let's dive a little deeper into what worker bees do throughout their life. Worker bees come from fertilized eggs. The queen is able to either lay a fertilized egg, which will develop into a worker, or an unfertilized egg, which will develop into a drone. After those fertilized eggs are laid and the workers develop, they will emerge from their cells. The jobs that they do within the hive are going to depend on the age of that worker. So as a worker goes through her life, her job will change over time. The first jobs of the workers are going to be nurse bees. They're going to emerge out of their cells, and their job then is to be cleaning brood area. We're going to be talking a little bit more about the brood nests and what that means a little bit later in this video. But as those first youngest nurse bees emerge, they're going to be kind of housekeepers. They're going to clean out the cells, and then they're going to be the nurse bees taking care of new developing larvae. Once they've passed through that period of their life, they move into house bees. They move out of that center brood area, which again we're going to talk about a little bit later, into more of the full hive. They're going to perform tasks like storing nectar, storing pollen, taking that transfer from your foraging bees, making it into a food that can be used by the nurse bees to feed the larvae. They're going to be making wax, and they're going to be keeping the hive clean. Once they've moved past that job, as they're getting a little bit older, in the last few weeks of their life, they are going to become foraging bees. The foraging bees are those bees that we're seeing flying around, pollinating our food, landing on our flowers. When you see a bee out on your walk, around in the yard, on your potted plants, those bees are kind of the oldest nurse bees of the colony. Those are our foraging bees. And at the very end of their life, their job is to be a guard bee. That's those bees that are protecting their colony. Let's move on to the drone bees. So drone bees develop from unfertilized eggs that the queen lays. All drones are male bees. Male bees serve a very specific purpose within the colony. Their one task is mating with virgin queens, new unmated virgin queens. Drone bees only mate in flight, not inside the colony. So the average day for a drone bee looks pretty relaxed. They're going to spend their mornings in the colony, kind of lounging around, waiting for the nicest part of the day. Generally, when you have new queens that are not mated, they're going to fly at the nicest part in the afternoon, the nicest part of the day. So during that time of day, all of the drones of your colony are going to come out and they congregate in an area like a drone congregation zone. This is where they are on the lookout for virgin queens. This is their only job within the colony. Drone bees do not do any they don't perform any work within the colony, and they don't even have stingers, so they are not guarding the colony or any of those tasks. Once a drone bee mates with a queen, they do mate in flight, and they will die after that. So within your colony, you do need to have drone bees, but you only want to see in the summer during prime mating season where you would get those new queens emerging, that you want to have about 10% drones in your colony. Let's talk about the nest and how bees build their home. When we're putting a new colony into our equipment, the first thing we have to look at is wax production. All honeybees need honeycomb in order to perform their daily tasks, such as the queen laying eggs or the worker bees storing pollen and nectar. It takes a lot of resources for these worker bees to create wax. They say it's 8 pounds of nectar or sugar syrup to make just 1 pound of wax. So inside of the honeybee nest, we are going to find multiple frames with that honeycomb built out, which is going to give our queen space to lay eggs and our bees room to store valuable resources. The honeybees are very meticulous about how their nest is configured. They like to build these nests within a dark cavity, such as the brood boxes we have here in our hive, or things like old hollowed out trees or abandoned buildings are places you would see bees building nests in the wild. Bees also are very meticulous about spacing within their colony. It is something that we refer to as bee space. Bee space is the space in between the honeycombs that allows the bees to move freely through the colony and perform their daily tasks. No matter where bees are building comb, they will build it with this bee space in mind. The bees will use this comb not just in their brood nest, but also up in the honey supers, where over time they will store excess resources. That's the honey that you're going to use. We want to keep these terms in mind as we move through the sections today, because we will be revisiting them as we learn more. Let's move on to feeding and natural forage. It's important to remember that bees require a lot of resources to grow their colony. So if you're starting out brand new with brand new equipment such as this, it's important to be mindful about what the bees are getting in nature, what we can do to support them in their colony growth. Feeding can be a very important spring task that often is overlooked in beekeeping. We often think that there are lots of resources out in nature and that our bees will have more than enough collecting nectar and pollen from the flowers. This isn't always the case. When you're starting beekeeping brand new, those bees have a lot of work to do. They have a lot of comb to build, and they have a lot of stores, a lot of food to store. So when your colony is growing, developing, and building their new home, it's important to be mindful of how much we're feeding them, or if we are feeding them at all. Do they have enough to be healthy and continue to grow. We're going to talk a little bit about what the difference is between things like nectar or sugar syrup and pollen. So not all food for bees is the same. And when we first get our colonies and we're first introducing them to our brand new equipment, it's important that we know what they need to establish that space to become a good, healthy, well-functioning colony through the summer. So one of the most important things for our new bees is wax production. Like we said, we talked about this a little earlier, our new colonies need a lot of wax. The queen needs wax for laying eggs, as well as the worker bees. They're going to need wax when there's lots of natural forage and they're out collecting nectar to make honey. So if we're setting our hives up at the beginning with very good nutrition, that's going to help them grow into a healthy colony through the summer. Supplemental feeding is an important part, especially in our area here in Alberta, where we are getting longer, cooler springs where there's not a lot naturally for bees. So supplemental feeding with things like a sugar syrup, a 1-to-1 sugar syrup, 1 part sugar, 1 part water, is going to encourage our bees to build comb. We often are putting that inside the colony, which makes it very easy for the bees to access that and process it into wax. The faster our bees can establish within their new equipment, the faster those bees, the queens, can lay more eggs and the colonies can grow. And the higher the chance of you seeing honey in that first season is going to be. So I am referring to that feeding for comb building as sugar syrup. So sugar syrup is going to be a replacement for nectar, carbohydrate source for your bees. It's going to be what bees need to build wax, to have energy, and they also use it to feed developing larvae. So it's very, very important. And then you will hear people say you need to feed your bees pollen. There's lots of pollen available naturally. It's one of the earlier things we're seeing for forage for our bees. Very early in the season, you're going to see some good willow forage on pollen. There is a good source of pollen, but supplementing those brand new bees, making it a little bit easier for them to grow, can help them along the way. So pollen primarily is a protein source. The bees aren't using that for energy, but rather they're using that to feed their young larvae. The nurse bees in our brood nest, which we talked about a little bit earlier, they're going to take some of that nectar or sugar syrup and they're going to take some of that pollen and they're going to make something called bee bread. And bee bread is what is fed to the developing larvae of your colony. And the really fascinating thing about honeybee colonies is that the queen is never going to lay more eggs than her colony can support. And so there's a few things that determine how productive your queen is, and again, how fast your colony will grow. And having enough food resource is one of those things. So the queen will determine how many eggs she's going to lay in a day by how many worker bees she has, how much space she has to lay eggs, as well as how much food resource she has. So if you have a colony that's growing and is short on resources, it's going to really be detrimental to the growth of that colony, and you're not going to see your queen performing at her optimal potential. So making sure our colonies are well fed is one of the best ways to see good growth and healthy summer colonies. Let's talk about some of the equipment that we're going to need. When we're getting started in beekeeping, often we think there's a lot of things we need. That's kind of true and also not. There's all kinds of equipment in beekeeping, lots and lots of choices that have to be made when you are deciding what kind of equipment it is you want to start with. The most important thing that you're going to need when you're buying equipment is going to be a hive. So we have a couple of different options. The first choice you're going to be making is, what kind of hive do I want to have? It's going to feel like the possibilities are endless. I have two here today that we're going to take a little look at. We're going to do a little bit of comparison between the differences here. But this is not all there is for options. So when we're looking at hives, the first choice we're going to have to make is, what material do I want my hive to be made out of? Here we have wood hives as well as a polystyrene hive. There are advantages and disadvantages to both of these sort of hives, to both material. So let's talk about this Hive IQ hive first. It's a polystyrene hive. Some of the advantages that come from using polystyrene hives are going to be the insulation that you have in these boxes all of the time. So polystyrene is a natural insulation. It's really fabulous for our climate here in Alberta. It's going to offer those bees a little bit of extra warmth, especially through some of those seasons. You may not have a wrap on your wood hive, and then the bees have to work a little bit harder to maintain some warmth. So polystyrene hives, you're seeing those advantages of a hive like this in the early spring as your colony is building up, as well as later into the fall as your colony is getting ready for winter. The disadvantage to the polystyrene hive is that it is going to be a little bit more costly. The boxes are a little bit less durable than wood. The advantages that outweigh that are going to be extra insulation value. The weight of these boxes is quite a bit less than the wood boxes. So you have a lighter box. No winter wrapping. When you buy these hives, often they come with things like screened bottom boards, built-in entrance reducers, and lots of really good components. So if you're looking for a hive that you're not going to have to be doing a lot of winter wrapping on it, that's going to give your bees some good advantage in the early spring, the late fall, be a little more lightweight, this might be the best option for you. So those are our polystyrene hives. This specific hive is an 8-9 frame hive. And that means that inside each one of these boxes is going to be only 8 or 9 frames. That also can affect the weight. If you're concerned about how much those big, heavy bee boxes weigh, this is a really good option for you. You're going to have a little bit more lightweight and some really great features. So with the wood hives, it's going to be a little bit more cost effective for us. The disadvantage to the wood hives is you're going to have to put a little more time and a little more resources into winterizing them. They do need to be wrapped to give the bees a little bit of an advantage in the winter where they're not having to create so much heat. They're a little bit more durable, but they don't offer that extra insulation. So this is a 10 frame hive. You can often get wood hives also in an 8 frame if you are concerned about the weight. So some of the other equipment that we are going to need to purchase once we've decided what kind of material we want our hive to be built out of, then we have to decide things like, what kind of bottom board am I looking for? How many boxes would I like to purchase and what kind of frames? So you may have looked around a little bit. You may not have, but if you have started looking at some equipment, you probably already know that the possibilities are endless. So many options and so many things you're going to have to make some choices on. Let's start with talking about our bottom boards. So once you've decided what kind of material you want your hive to be made out of, you need to decide what kind of bottom board you're looking for. There are a few options. You can go with something like a reversible bottom board. This is a solid bottom board. You're going to set it here like this and put your boxes on top. Some other options are going to be this, like a screened bottom board. So your screened bottom board primarily is used for different management techniques. So often people will use screened bottom boards for doing a mite drop test or just simply being able to clean out debris that's going to fall through that screen onto the backboard there. We're not going to cover a lot of those things in this course today. However, we do talk more in depth about this in our beginner beekeeping class. So we're going to decide when we're buying our equipment, are we wanting something like a screened bottom board, or are we wanting to go with something like this one here, which is our solid bottom board. So once we've started with our base, we have to decide on our boxes. What are we going to do for boxes? Usually when we're buying our equipment, we're going to want to buy enough equipment for our hive to grow into. There is nothing worse than having a hive inspection, you're going out and you're looking at your bees and you realize you need another box. Having an extra box on hand for when your colony is growing is a really good idea. So the first boxes that we need to look at are going to be our brood boxes. So we talked a little earlier about the brood nest. So if we recall, the brood nest is where our bees are making their home. Most often, people are using a deep box for a brood box. So you can see on this hive here that we have 2 deep boxes. And then on the top, we have one box that is a little bit more shallow. This is called a medium box. And often people are using those for honey supers. Like so many things in beekeeping, this is not a rule. You can use all medium boxes. You could use all deep boxes. But most commonly, people are using deep boxes for brood, giving those bees a nice big solid space for their nest, for their home, and they're using these smaller, medium-sized boxes for honey. The reason being is that these are going to weigh a lot less. If you get one of these deep boxes filled up with honey, it can weigh up to 100 pounds. So if you're feeling extra strong and you want to have a few less boxes in your shed, you could decide to go with all deep boxes. So there's another choice when you're buying equipment, something you want to put some thought into. How heavy do I want to have to be lifting these boxes at? Do I want to have medium boxes or do I want to have all deep boxes? When we talk a little bit later about introducing our new bees into our equipment, we're going to talk about how they grow into those 2 boxes. But right now we're talking about equipment we need to purchase. And I always recommend that we're buying 2 boxes for brood. Then we are going to think about how many honey supers we need. And I would recommend that you purchase a minimum of 2 honey supers per colony. The reason being is that if your bees in the first year get into that first super and they build lots of wax and they store lots of honey, you don't want to have to remove it, get the honey off and put it back on. You need to have a box available and ready so your bees have more space to grow. So having 2 of those boxes is going to allow you to do a hive inspection. If your bees need the space, you can go get them that extra box. So having 2 brood boxes and 2 honey boxes is really a minimum that you should purchase when you're thinking of getting ready for your new colony. So after we have decided what size of box we're going to use, deep and mediums, or all deeps or all mediums, we need to decide on whether or not we're going to use a queen excluder. It's hard to cover all this stuff in a short 101 beekeeping video. So if you want to elaborate on this, taking something like a full beginner beekeeping course is a really good idea. Really pinpoint what kind of management you want to have and then what equipment you need for that. So we're going to touch just really quickly on the queen excluder. So the next item we have here is going to be the queen excluder. So this is going to go after our brood boxes. The purpose of a queen excluder is going to be to keep your queen down in the brood box or in her home and out of your honey supers. So some people choose to use a queen excluder where other beekeepers don't. So you have to decide, do I want a queen excluder? And then what kind of queen excluder do I want? There are choices for that as well. So that's something you're going to have to put a little thought into. Go to your beekeeping store, check out what they have and make some of those decisions. So this is what the queen excluder looks like to keep our queen in the brood nest. And then we will also need a lid. So here we have an inner cover. The reason that we are needing an inner cover for a hive like this one is that bees make everything sticky. So if you have a lid, this is called a telescopic hive cover. If you have a lid like this and you're putting it right on top of your hives, right on top like this, what's going to happen is your bees are going to glue this lid down to your box and you are never going to be able to get this lid up to do your inspections. So choosing some kind of inner cover, this one's just a standard inner cover. You can do things like canvas inner covers. Again, there's so many options. This is going to allow your bees to do their thing, make things really sticky, but you're also going to be able to pry this open. So if you are getting your Hive tool, you can get it right in there and you can open up your box that way. So this is just the cover that's keeping your lid from sticking down to your hive. So you can choose something like this inner cover. And like I said, canvas inner covers, deep inner covers, there's lots of different options. You just want to have something in between that box and your telescopic hive cover like this one. This one is keeping the weather out like this. Okay. And that's going to keep everything together. So we have talked about having a bottom board, some boxes, queen excluders, inner covers, and our outer lids. Now we have to decide what kind of frames are we going to be using. Again, so many options. When you're looking to buy frames, you have the option of one-piece plastic frames, wood frames with plastic foundation, as well as wood frames with wax foundation. Let's just take a really quick peek at what those look like. So this is our wood frame with a beeswax foundation. So a lot of people would choose this if they're looking for a little bit more natural equipment to give their bees, where you're not wanting to introduce any plastic. So this is definitely an advantage in that case. If you were going to be pulling these out, extracting them, like if you're using them for any honey storage, they're not as durable being a wax foundation as if you had a plastic foundation. So this frame is really good for your brood nest if you're concerned about having plastic in your hive. Some of the other options are our one-piece plastic frame. The real advantage to these frames is going to be durability. So these are all a waxed frame. Very few places you can find an unwaxed plastic frame. So most often they are waxed, one-piece plastic. The advantage to a frame like this is going to be durability. It's all one piece. You're not going to be breaking these joints apart. Where our wood frame, they have a very nice feel. I personally love these frames, but the longevity is a little bit less. So you see there's a joint, it's glued, it's stapled, but sometimes those are separating when these frames get really heavy with honey or with brood and honey. And you can see a little bit more damage happening in these frames. So this is a wood frame with a plastic foundation. So deciding what kind of frame is going to be kind of your next decision, and then also deciding what color of frame you want. All the time we get this question is, does it matter? And it doesn't really matter. It matters most to you. So most commonly, people are using black foundation or black frames for their brood nest. And the reason that they're doing that is so you can see the eggs inside those cells with the dark background and the little teeny white eggs. So most commonly, you're going to buy a black frame for your brood nest and then a nice white frame like this one for your honey super. You're going to have really light comb and it looks beautiful. But essentially, it's a beekeeper that cares about the color and not so much the bees. So pick whichever frame you like the best. So the last thing that we're going to talk about for equipment right now is going to be our feeder. So like we touched on a little bit earlier, the importance of feeding early in the spring as our colony is developing, it's important that you are purchasing some kind of feeder, especially if you are getting your bees quite early in the season. So this is one option for feeders, and like everything else, there's a number of different choices. This is what we call a frame feeder, and it fits in one frame space. So you'll remove one of your frames and put in a feeder like this. Some other options are hive top feeders, pail feeders, entrance feeders, lots of different choices. I personally love these frame feeders when you're getting started. They fit nicely in your hive and they're very easy access for your bees to get the sugar syrup they need for that early spring growth. So picking a feeder is kind of the last thing on our equipment list as we're getting ready for our bees. And I should mention, when we're buying our bottom board, it's also a really good idea to get an entrance reducer. So this is often going to be used in the early spring when your bees are brand new in your hive, and then again in the fall when the nights start getting really cool, and through the winter. This is going to reduce your entrance and make it from this full size into one of these smaller sizes. So having an entrance reducer is also a really good thing to purchase. Often you can purchase things as a kit when you're getting started, something like a complete hive kit in wood or a hive kit in polystyrene, and that's going to help you get all those components that you need and have everything ready when you need it. After we've decided what we're going to buy for hive equipment, there are a few tools that we need to pick up. These are my must-haves. The number one is going to be your hive tool. You absolutely need to buy one or two of these hive tools. If you are having a helper, if you're beekeeping with someone else, I recommend getting your own hive tool so you each have one. You're going to set these down, you're going to misplace them. I like to have a few on hand. So a good hive tool, this is called a J-hook. It's my favorite, and it's probably the most popular one that we sell. So a good hive tool, number one tool you're going to need. The next thing on my list for tools is going to be your smoker. I would recommend as a new beekeeper that when you're doing inspections, you're getting your smoker ready and you're having it in case you need it. So if you're feeling a little bit uneasy, or if your bees are starting to get a little bit uneasy, giving them some smoke is going to be a great way to help calm them and make you feel a little bit more at ease during your inspection. So having a smoker, having it lit and ready for your inspections, I think is very important. The next item on my list is going to be a bee brush. It is very handy to have one of these. You don't ever think you need it until you need it. And when you need it, you really wish you had it. So I always recommend having one of these for your toolkit. So a good bee brush is the next one. Some people do like to have a frame grip. So it's something that's a little bit of a personal preference, like a lot of things in beekeeping. It's not an expensive tool, but I would recommend maybe trying it. Sometimes you're going to find it hard to pick up those frames, and this can really be helpful to grab the frames and pick them up from the middle. So that would be the other hive tool, or the other tool that I would recommend having in your toolkit. Some other things you might want to think of buying are queen clips. You want to have some kind of smoker fuel. Maybe do a little bit of reading into what you want to use for smoker fuel. Smoker chips are really good. Burlap is good. Some people use pine cones or cardboard. Getting a smoker fuel, maybe a queen clip, is a really good addition to this, and that's a really great start for your tools. Now that we've talked about purchasing equipment, let's talk about getting bees. There are a lot of options for buying bees. We're going to talk about two of the most popular ways to purchase bees, the advantages and the disadvantages to both of those ways. So the first thing we're going to touch on is buying packaged bees. So packaged bees are an imported package of bees, just as it sounds. You're going to get a screened-in box of bees, and it will have a queen in a cage. The advantage to these packaged bees is they come very early in the season. They're often arriving mid-April. The disadvantage to that is that it still can be very cold here in Alberta in the middle of April. Often packaged bees are not recommended for brand new beekeepers using brand new equipment. So the reason being is that if you're getting a package of bees, so just bees in a box, and you're shaking them or dumping them into brand new equipment, there's no comb for them. It's going to take those bees some time and some resources to build comb before a queen can start laying. So as a brand new beekeeper, you're a little bit short on those resources you need, like comb and food stores. You also are lacking some of the experience required to successfully install a package. So packages do require some additional experience. You're going to need to know if your hive is queen right or not. So because those packages come with a queen in a separate cage, not integrated into the colony, you're going to have to introduce her. I'm not going to talk about that today, but we do cover a lot of that in our beginner beekeeping course if you're looking for some further information. To introduce, there's always a risk when introducing queens. So if you're not feeling confident in that knowledge, you're not feeling confident in knowing if your hive is queen right or not when you're doing your first inspection about 5 days after introduction, it might be best to kind of steer away from a package. Way to buy bees is buying a nucleus colony. Nucleus colonies are often referred to as nukes. Nukes are probably the most popular way for brand new beekeepers to acquire bees. So let's talk about what's in a nuke. A nuke is going to come in a 5-frame box. Some places you can buy 4-frame nukes. Those are kind of your most common configuration. 4-frame, 5-frame nuke. With those nukes, you are getting a nucleus colony. So think of just smaller colony. Those colonies come with 5 frames or 4 frames. The queen is already integrated into that colony. She's laying. You have worker bees, you have brood at all stages, and you also have some already stored food stores. And basically, when you're purchasing a nuke, you're taking that nuke out of its transport box, which it comes into, and you are transferring it into your equipment that you've purchased and you have all set up and ready. So it is going to take less skill. You have a higher rate of success generally as a brand new beekeeper buying a nuke. Not all nukes are created equal. You do need to do some research and make sure that you're buying a nuke from a reputable source. A lot of beekeepers will sell nukes on places like Kijiji, Facebook Marketplace, beekeeping sites, and things like that. It's important to do a little bit of research and find out if that beekeeper is someone who has some experience selling bees in your area, as well as is a reputable beekeeper. Because you definitely don't want to start off your beekeeping journey on the wrong foot with bees that maybe are not healthy and strong to get you started. Okay, now we've discussed buying equipment as well as procuring bees. Let's talk about some of the other steps we need to take before these bees arrive. So some of the other considerations we need to be putting some time into thinking about is going to be our hive location as well as local regulation. So if you're thinking about urban beekeeping, there's many towns and cities that do allow urban beekeeping, but there are some that do not. It is good before you're making this financial and time commitment that you know if the area that you live in, whether it's a town or a city, does allow you to have urban bees. It's a little bit easier if you have rural bees. There are less guidelines. So for example, the city of Calgary, where we're located, they do have a bee bylaw. It's important to look at the responsible pet bylaws in your area and make sure that you are allowed to have bees and that you're following those proper steps to get registered. Often it's very easy to do that. Check your pet bylaws and see if you're allowed to have bees in the area where you live. Often you are required to have proof of an education program, and we do offer those programs at Worker and Hive to get your beekeeping permits. So take a look at that. It's probably the most important first step before you're making that investment, committing to bees and then realizing that you can't keep them in your backyard. You do have to register your bees with Alberta Agriculture. I'll include the link below for that registration. It's a very simple process. You fill out the form. You'll just need to know where you purchased your bees from, how much equipment you do have. Very easy to send in, and it does allow Alberta Agriculture to have some traceability if there are ever disease issues within our province. After you've registered your bees, you will also need to register for a premises identification number. This is going to allow you to buy registered bee medications within the province of Alberta. So you are required, before you receive your bees, to register with the government as well as get a PID number. We'll make sure that both of those links are in the description to make it really easy for you to do that next step. Now that we've covered a little bit about bee biology, we've talked about the hive, the brood nest, we've talked about purchasing equipment, acquiring bees, and also learning about our local regulations and registration required when we do get our new colonies. Let's touch a little bit on what we're going to need to do for inspections. So beekeeping is not a huge time commitment if you have 1 or 2 hives. You're going to need to go out through the season and check on those bees about once a week. I always recommend for brand new beekeepers that it's really important when you're first learning and you're seeing a lot of these things for the first time that you're going in and you're looking at your colony once every 7 to 10 days. This is going to allow you to experience more things that are happening inside the colony. Sometimes you'll open it up, you'll see something new that you've never seen before, and that's going to spark a little bit of investigation. You're going to ask questions, whether that be to your local beekeeping store, your beekeeping mentor, or searching the internet. It's every time you see something new, you're going to learn a little bit more. So doing those inspections through the season every 7 to 10 days is really going to help you grow as a beekeeper, especially through your first year. So let's talk about the spring first. So in the spring, once we've acquired our bees, we need to put them in our hive. So that's going to be your very first step. We need to keep in mind that bees don't like to have an excess amount of space. This is really important to note, especially during some of the colder times of year. So when we get our bees, maybe it's at the end of May, we could still have some cooler nights. We need to give those bees only the space that they need. Let's talk about installing a package first. Before you pick up your package, that you have your hive all ready for your brand new bees. Let's do a little quick run through on how we get our hive ready. When we get our new bees, we do want to just give them the space that they need. So we've set up our bottom board, we've set up our extra entrance reducer in there, and then we will fill our box with frames. If we've chosen to use a frame feeder as our feeder, that is going to go into the extra space there. So we'll have our frame feeder and then we have our frames. So whether we are putting in a nuke or a package, we're going to need to make sure that that box is filled up with frames. So with a package, we're going to be ready here. We have enough frames. We will put on our inner cover. So we talked about those inner covers, and we have our lid. So now we've set this box up ready to receive our new bees. It's really important to do this not when you have the bees in your hands, but to do it maybe the day before or a few days before, so that when you come out and you have your new bees, you are ready to go. If we're going to be installing a package, which we remember is a box, a screened box with bees and a queen, it has no frames, it has no comb, we are going to need all these frames in here. So we're going to install our package in there. I'm not going to go over the step-by-step on how to install a package. That's great for another class. That's great to ask also to ask where you're purchasing your bees, or watch another video on how to install them. So we're not going to go step by step today, but we will need all these frames for a package. If you're installing a nuke, you have to remember that we have 5 frames in our nuke. We're going to need to make sure we remove those. So 4, and we're going to remove 5 frames out of the middle of our hive. And now we have this hive ready for a nuke. When we receive that nuke, this space will be where we put in our frames that come out of that nuke with the bees in it. Also, another good idea, before you transfer those bees in, you want to fill up your feeder. If you're having everything ready to go, before you move the bees, it's going to be a really nice, easy transition for you. So another little tip on transferring your bees is make sure that you give yourself enough time. You don't want to come out and get this process started, run into maybe a little glitch or something that you forgot. Oh, I forgot to make sugar syrup, or I forgot to get all the frames that I need. You don't want to have your first bee experience to be rushed. So make sure you're leaving yourself enough time. Often when you're picking up bees, it's going to be either early in the morning for things like packages, or in the evening. If you're buying nukes, you're not going to pick them up during the day. If you have an evening pickup for your nukes, it's a really great idea to get your hive set up like this. Bring your nuke home, set it right here on top of your hive where it's going to be permanently moved to, and open that nuke up so they can fly. And you can install them in the morning when you're going to have ample time to work slowly and enjoy that experience. Once we've got our bees installed, if we're doing a package, we want to give them about 5 days to get settled in, and then we're going to be checking for queen rightness. Make sure that that queen got out of the cage and was accepted by the colony. If we're introducing a nuke, we're going to leave them 5 to 7 days. Let them become acquainted with their new home, oriented with their space, and then we're going to give them a little check and see how they're doing. It is important that we're starting off, like I said, with a single box, and as those bees grow, you're going to add boxes as you need to give them this space. It's important in the spring with our new bees that we're checking those feeders and keeping them nice and well fed to encourage wax production and colony growth. Other things that we're looking for in the spring is that we're seeing brood at all stages. So we're seeing that the queen is still laying eggs. They can be a little bit tricky to find. You want to see that there's larvae in those cells, which are little white, they almost look like a worm, a little white larva in there, and then capped brood. I know when we go in and we look through our colonies, we want to see the queen. We want to know that she's there. But sometimes just seeing evidence of the queen is going to be enough. So in the spring, we're making sure that they have ample feed, whether that's pollen patties or sugar syrup. We're checking for queen rightness. That does our colony have brood at all stages? Eggs, larvae, and capped brood. And then we're seeing every week that that colony is growing. They're building more wax, and there's more and more bees. Those are going to be our main spring inspection steps. As we move more into summer and our colony grows and they've filled out that second brood box, it's going to be time to think about giving them extra space in a honey super. Through the summer, that's going to be our main management objective. Do my bees have space? Are they queen right? And are they still growing? Keep in mind that often in your first year, it will take bees that first season to build enough wax to fill up your whole 2 brood boxes. If we have a good season, lots of moisture, lots of nectar flow, there is a chance that you will get into the honey supers. So checking those bees is critical. Once we are moving through those summer months and we're coming into the end of July, if you have honey to harvest, that is the time to do it. End of July into the beginning of August is going to be our honey harvest time. And that is one of the biggest, most exciting first year achievements is to get that first jar of honey that you have. It's pretty wonderful. So you're going to do that at the end of your summer management, and we're going to move into fall management. Fall management is going to be the most important part of the year. What we do for our bees in the fall is going to be really what sets them up for success or not through the winter months. So we do have to remember that the winter is going to be the most stressful and vulnerable time for our colonies. And setting them up properly, giving them all the resources they need in the fall is going to be imperative to have overwintering success. Very important fall management techniques that as a beekeeper, once you master those, you're going to see more success in your wintering. Number one is going to be mite management. The Varroa mite has one of the biggest economic impacts on the honeybee industry. If you are going to learn anything about management of honeybees, you need to learn about managing mite load in your colony. And fall is a very, very important time to make sure that your bees are mite-free. Learning proper mite treatment techniques as well as mite monitoring is going to be crucial to getting your bees through winter. The second management technique that is very important in the fall is going to be fall feeding. You don't always need to feed your bees in the fall, but you do need to be mindful. Do my bees have enough food stored to make it through winter? If you're in a climate like ours, here in Calgary, we have very long winters and they vary in temperature where you get some really gorgeous Chinooks to really cold weather. Making sure that your bees have enough stored food is going to be critical to get them through to this spring. Observing your levels of feed, making sure that those hives are going into winter with lots of good stored food, and managing those mites. Are my bees going to go into winter, the most vulnerable time of the year, disease-free and well-fed? As we move through that fall management into the colder months of the winter, into the end of October and into November, if you are using wooden hives like this, you're going to need to get those hives winterized. Wrapping them is a very good idea. Giving them some extra top insulation to keep all of that heat into their boxes is also a very good idea. So fall management and actually winterizing our bees are two very different things. Fall management is preparing them for the winter season, and winterizing them is wrapping them to keep them warm. In-hive management has been completed by this time. So if you're using wood, now is a really good time in October, mid to late October, get those wrapped up, insulated well. Maybe you want to put some fondant on and get them ready for winter. Some things to consider when you're winterizing your hive. Do you need to put a mouse guard on that hive? Do you have issues with mice where you are? Wrapping the hive, what about moisture problems? There's a lot of things to consider. Am I going to have a top entrance, ventilation in my hive? Or am I going to put some extra insulation on the top and have no ventilation? So a lot of things to think about. There's a lot of ways to get those hives wrapped and ready for winter. I really recommend doing some research on that, taking a class, talking to some experienced beekeepers in your area. If you are using something like the Hive IQ, a polystyrene hive, there are still a few things that you need to do. So making sure that you have ample top insulation is very important. With our variance in temperature, our Chinooks here in this region, we're getting a lot of ups and downs in the weather, and it's not always the cold weather that's harming our bees. It's a switch from hot to cold that can cause condensation. And remember that wet bees are generally dead bees. So if you're getting condensation on the top of your hive from the variance in temperature or heat loss, your bees are going to get wet. And when that temperature drops, they're going to freeze. So even in a polystyrene hive, giving them a little bit of top insulation is a really great idea. Maybe you want to give them a little bit of fondant as well. So those are things to consider as we move into the winter. Through the winter months, there's not really a lot of management we can do for our bees. Now is just the time to worry, are they going to make it through the season? And am I going to see them in the spring? Almost every new beekeeper worries about their bees in the winter. We call it the planning season. It's also, in reality, the worrying season. There is nothing you can do for your bees in the winter. If you have a solid fall management plan, you have strong, well-fed, disease-free bees with a good, strong queen, those are the bees you're going to see in the spring. So through the winter, you want to, whenever possible, leave your bees bee. I know when we get warm weather, it's tempting to go in there, to open up those hives, to make sure they're still alive, but there is not much that you can do for them other than ensure that they have enough food to make it through the winter. And then our spring management inspections are going to start again as we move into April, where we're going to start feeding. We're going to feed pollen and we're going to feed sugar syrup. So in those cold months, we just have to wait and hope that we did everything that we could to see those bees into the spring. Today, we learned a lot of really valuable information, but that was just scratching the surface. If you're ready to dive in, I invite you to join me for a full beekeeping course. Covers all of the essential knowledge you need to know to have a very successful first year and beyond in beekeeping. I hope that you learned a lot today. I'd like to welcome you to our beekeeping community. We're so glad that you're here.